The year is 2024. Dr. Anya Sharma leans over the light table. Her finger traces a line on the hydrological map. The map shows the aquifer beneath the Cimarron Valley. It's a spiderweb of blues and purples. Deep blue means high water volume. Pale purple means depletion. Most of the map is a sickly, pale purple, except for one section, a deep, vibrant, impossible blue, a single ranch, the Vance property, a geological anomaly. That's what they called it at first. Her research assistant, a young man named Ben, speaks. He says, "The data must be wrong. There's no way one property is recharging the aquifer for the entire basin. It defies the models." Dr. Sharma doesn't answer. She just keeps staring at the map, at that defiant patch of blue. She picks up a secondary report, a soil composition analysis. Carbon sequestration levels are off the charts. Organic matter is 5 times the regional average. Water retention is near perfect. Ben speaks again. He says it's like a different planet down there, under that one ranch. Dr. Sharma flips to the last page, an appendix. Historical Land Use Survey, Cimarron Valley, 1988. A single paragraph catches her eye. It mentions a proposal by a company called Corp, a plan to purchase all 27 ranches in the valley, a plan to create a vertically integrated cattle operation. The report notes that 26 of the 27 ranchers accepted the offer, an offer of double the appraised value, a generous offer, a logical offer. The report lists the name of the single holdout, Ilara Vance, aged 24 at the time. Dr. Sharma looks from the 1988 report to the 2024 water map, from the name of the woman who said no to the impossible blue that shouldn't exist. The room is silent. Ben finally breaks the silence. He says, "What did she know that nobody else did?" This is the story of that refusal and the decades that followed. It's a story about the difference between a price and a value, and how the most dangerous limitation is the one imposed by someone who genuinely believes they are protecting you. This channel tells the stories that get left in the soil, the histories written in fence lines and water rights. If you believe those stories matter, subscribe. Because what happened in that valley changed everything, and you're going to want to hear what happened next. Let me take you back to the spring of 1988. The Cimarron Valley was tired. The land was tired. The people were tired. Generations of hard work had led to this: debt, drought, and the quiet feeling of an ending. Ilara Vance felt it every morning. She was 24 years old. Her parents were gone, killed in a car crash on an icy road 2 years before. The ranch was hers now, all 840 acres of it, and the debt that came with it. She sat at the same kitchen table her grandmother had used. The wood was worn smooth. Across from her sat a man named David Sterling. He was not a bad man. This is important to understand. David Sterling coached Little League. He served on the hospital board. He had ranched this same valley for 20 years before taking a job with Corp. He had kind eyes, a firm handshake. He spoke in a calm, reasonable voice. He believed every word he was saying. He slid a folder across the table. The Corp logo was embossed in green foil. Inside was the offer, a number that made Ilara's breath catch in her throat. It was more money than her family had seen in 3 generations. Double the appraisal. Cash. No contingencies. A 30-day close. David Sterling let the number sit in the air. He let it work its magic. He said, "Ilara, we've made this offer to every family in the valley. From Miller's Creek to the North Ridge, 26 of your neighbors have already signed. You're the last one." He leaned forward, his voice softening. He was a father speaking to a daughter, not a businessman closing a deal. "I knew your dad," he said. "He was a good man, a proud man. He wouldn't want to see you struggle. This life, it's over. The small family ranch can't compete anymore. The margins aren't there. The costs are too high. It's a slow death. You know it. I know it." He gestured out the window, at the pale, thirsty-looking grass. "This is a chance for a new life, a good life. Pay off the bank, buy a house in town, go back to school. You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Don't waste it here. Don't drown with a sinking ship." He said it with such sincerity, such genuine concern. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a negotiation. It was, in his mind, a rescue. He was saving her from a future of poverty and failure. He was certain of it. And that certainty was more powerful than any threat. It was a cage made of kindness. Ilara looked down at the number on the page. She could feel the weight of the banknotes, the stares of her neighbors, the logic of it all. Everything he said was true. By every conventional measure, he was right. She was alone. She was in debt. She was holding on to a past that had no future. She looked up from the paper. She looked past David Sterling, out the window, at the curve of the creek bed, the shape of the distant buttes, the way the light hit the old cottonwood her grandfather had planted. She felt something she couldn't quite name, not defiance, not anger, something quieter, a sense of connection, a responsibility. She slid the folder back across the table. Her hand was steady. Her voice was low, but it didn't tremble. "Thank you for the offer, David. It's very generous, but my answer is no." David Sterling blinked. He wasn't prepared for that. He thought she misunderstood. "Ilara," he said, "let me explain the tax advantages." She held up a hand. "I understand the offer. The ranch is not for sale." He sat back, a flicker of frustration in his kind eyes. The frustration of a man who is trying to help someone who refuses to be helped. He said, "With all due respect, you can't make it here alone. You don't have the capital. You don't have the equipment. You don't have the economy of scale. Agricor is the future. We will run 10,000 head of cattle here. We will have our own processing plant. We will control the market. How can you possibly compete with that?" Ilara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said a thing that would echo for the next 30 years. "I'm not trying to compete with you, David. I'm trying to do something else entirely." He shook his head slowly, the way you shake your head at a child's fantasy. He stood up. He left the folder on the table. "The offer is good for 30 days, he said. "For your sake, I hope you reconsider." He walked out the door. He got in his clean Ford sedan, and he drove away. Certain he had just left a foolish young woman to her inevitable ruin. The silence in the kitchen was heavy. The number on that paper seemed to scream from the table. A life of ease. A life without debt. A life without worry. All she had to do was sign her name. She walked to the window and watched his car disappear down the dirt road, a plume of dust rising behind it, the dust of progress, the dust of the future. She was now an island, a tiny 840-acre island in the middle of the vast Agricorp Sea. Her neighbors would not be happy. The bank would not be happy. She felt a wave of doubt so strong it made her knees weak. Have you ever been told you couldn't do something? Not by an enemy, but by a friend. By someone who thought they had your best interests at heart. Someone who laid out all the logical reasons for your failure. And for a moment, you believed them, because their certainty was so absolute. It's the loneliest feeling in the world. Drop a comment and tell me about a time you had to trust yourself against the certainty of others. Because what Alara did next was an act of quiet, radical faith. She left the folder on the table. She walked into her grandfather's study, a small room that smelled of old books and pipe tobacco. She pulled a leather-bound journal from the shelf. His name was Thomas Vance. He had died when she was 10. He had been a strange man, her grandfather. He read books on soil science and Roman history. He talked to the creek. He believed the land was a living thing. Her father had loved him, but had thought his ideas were impractical, old-fashioned. Ilara opened the journal. His handwriting filled the page, strong, deliberate cursive. She found the entry for the day she was born, March 12, 1964. He hadn't written about his new granddaughter. He had written about the water. Today the snowmelt began. The creek is running high. I walked the upper pasture. The water wants to spread out, to slow down. My father built ditches to fight it, to hurry it off the land. My neighbors do the same. They think water is a resource to be used. They don't understand. Water is a partner to be courted. Ilara kept reading, page after page. Decades of observations. Drawings of root systems. Notes on bird migrations. Theories about the relationship between bison and grass. It was a conversation with the land, a conversation that had lasted 50 years. Then she found the passage that changed everything. It was dated the year of the last great drought, 1956. Everyone is selling their cattle. They say the land is broken. They say it won't recover. They are wrong. The land is not broken. It is thirsty. They have stripped its armor. The bare soil bakes in the sun. The rain, when it comes, will be a flood, not a blessing. It will carry our best soil to the ocean. They have forgotten the old ways. They have forgotten that the grass is the key. The grass builds the soil. The soil holds the water. The water feeds the grass. It is a circle. We have broken the circle, but it can be mended. The water remembers where it's supposed to go. So does the land. The water remembers. The phrase settled deep in her bones. It was an anchor in the storm of doubt. David Sterling's logic was the logic of spreadsheets and markets. Her grandfather's logic was the logic of ecosystems and time. She closed the journal. She walked back into the kitchen. She picked up the AgriCorp folder. She walked to the wood stove, opened the little iron door, and she fed the future to the flames. The paper curled. The green foil logo melted away. The big number turned to ash. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel brave. She felt a quiet, profound sense of purpose. She would mend the circle, or she would fail on her own terms, but she would not sell. The dirt was not for sale. The next 10 years were a blur of work, the kind of work that ages you in dog years. The first thing she did was sell half her herd. Her father had run 300 head of Hereford Angus Cross. The bank held the note on all of them. She sold 150 head at auction. The price was low. Her neighbors shook their heads. "She's liquidating," they whispered at the diner. "She won't last the year." She took the money. She walked into the bank. She paid down a massive chunk of her debt. The loan officer was surprised. He had expected a plea for an extension, not a cashier's check. With the rest of the money, she bought fence, miles and miles of high-tensile electric fence, and a solar-powered fencer. Then she bought new cattle. Not the big, blocky cattle her father had raised. She bought a small herd of Scottish Highland cattle, and another of Red Poll, breeds that were considered relics, smaller, slower growing, but tough, hardy. They could survive a winter without tons of supplemental feed. They were built for this high country land. Her neighbors laughed. They called them her hairy pasture ornaments. She ignored them. She started reading her grandfather's journal every night, and every day she put his words into practice. She divided her 840 acres into 120 small paddocks. She began a system of intensive rotational grazing, moving the cattle every single day, sometimes twice a day. The idea was to mimic the ancient patterns of the bison: graze hard, trample the ground, lay down a litter of manure and organic matter, and then move on, and not come back for months, giving the grass a long, long time to recover, to drive its roots deep, to build soil. The first year, the land looked terrible, chewed up, stomped down. The Corp feedlot was being built on the adjacent property. The scale of it was staggering. Fleets of earth movers, mountains of steel. A small city rising from the valley floor. David Sterling would drive by her ranch on his way to the construction site. He'd see her out in the field, moving a temporary fence line by hand. A lone woman in a sea of grass. He'd shake his head with a look of pity. He felt he had failed her. Failed to save her from herself. She found an unlikely ally. An old Basque sheepherder named Meadow. He had worked for her grandfather. He lived in a small cabin up in the hills. He came down one day. He watched her for hours. Finally, he walked up to her. He said, "Your grandfather would be proud. You are listening to the land, but you are not listening to the water." He spent the next year teaching her how to read the contour of the land, how to find the old, forgotten springs, how to build small, simple check dams with rocks and branches, not to stop the water, but to slow it down, to make it walk, not run, to give it time to sink into the earth, to recharge the soil, to heal the creek. The work was slow, backbreaking, invisible. While Corp was building a monument to industrial efficiency, Alara Vance was engaged in a quiet act of resurrection. She was mending the circle, one rock at a time, one fence post at a time, one day at a time. The years passed. The 90s bled into the 2000s. Corp became a titan. 10,000 head of cattle, then 20,000. The smell of the feedlot permeated the valley, a constant, sour haze. The trucks ran day and night. The river downstream from their operation began to change. The water turned murky. Algae blooms appeared in the summer. The old fishing spots were barren. But they were profitable, immensely profitable. The quarterly reports were glowing. David Sterling was promoted to vice president. He moved to a regional office in the city, but he kept his house in the valley. He still drove past her ranch. He saw things changing, slowly at first, then with gathering speed. Her pastures were no longer pale and thirsty. They were green, a deep, vibrant green he hadn't seen in this valley since he was a boy. Even in the dry months. The creek that ran through her property, which used to dry up by August, now ran clear, all year round. He saw new kinds of birds on her land. He saw deer and elk grazing near her strange, hairy cattle. Her ranch was becoming an oasis, a world apart. She started selling her beef, not on the commodity market. She found a butcher in the city, a man who cared about quality. She sold him 2 carcasses the first year. He called her a week later. He said, "I have never tasted beef like this. What are you doing up there?" The next year, he bought 10. The year after, 50. She developed a brand, Vance Valley Reserve. She sold to high-end restaurants, to specialty grocers. She didn't get the commodity price. She got 4 times the commodity price. And she had no feed costs. No vet bills for sick animals packed into a feedlot. No fuel costs for massive machinery. Her input costs were a fraction of Corp's. Her profit margin per acre was double. Contrast math. It's the quietest, most devastating revenge. In 1998, 10 years after she said no, the first of her neighbors came back. An old man named Charlie. He had sold his 160 acres to AgriCorp. He had taken the money, bought a condo in Arizona, lost half of it in the stock market, spent the rest on medical bills. He was broke. He came to Alara, hat in hand. He asked if he could work for her. She said, "I can do one better, Charlie." She had been saving, living simply, putting every dollar back into the ranch. She went to the AgriCorp land office. The parcel next to hers, Charlie's old place, was not in use. They used it as a buffer zone. It was overgrazed and weedy. She made them an offer. She offered them what they had paid Charlie for it, 10 years earlier. They laughed at her. But the land was just sitting on their books, a non-performing asset. They made a counteroffer. She accepted. She paid for it in cash. She walked over to Charlie's place that afternoon. She handed him the deed. She said, "I'll lease it back from you for $1 a year. You help me manage my herd. You live on your land. You die on your land." Charlie broke down and wept. That was the first piece, the first island reclaimed from the sea. It wouldn't be the last. Let me tell you about the next 20 years, because this is where the story becomes bigger than one woman and one ranch. 2002, she buys the Miller place, 320 acres, cash. 2005. She buys the old Henderson Ranch, 640 acres, cash. 2009. She brings on 3 young ranching families as partners. She doesn't hire them. She gives them a stake, a path to ownership. They learn her methods, the rotational grazing, the water management. The circle begins to grow. Her brand, Vance Valley Reserve, is now nationally known. Chefs write about it in magazines. Documentaries are made about her methods. She never gives interviews. She just does the work. AgriCorp watches. At first, they are dismissive. She's a boutique operation, a novelty, not a threat. Then, they become annoyed. Her success is an uncomfortable counter-narrative to their story of inevitable industrial scale. Then, they become concerned. Droughts are becoming more frequent, more severe. Their wells have to go deeper. Their feed costs are soaring. The price of corn, the price of soy, the price of fuel. They are leveraged, dependent on a global supply chain. Alara is not. Her cattle eat the grass that grows under their feet, grass that is fed by the water held in her soil. She is a closed loop, self-sufficient, free. David Sterling is retired now. He sits on the AgriCorp advisory board. He sees the numbers, the rising costs, the falling water table. He drives through the valley. It is a checkerboard now. Patches of dusty brown, owned by the corporation, and growing patches of vibrant green, owned or managed by Alara Vance. He sees her sometimes, from a distance. She's older now. Her hair is gray, but she still moves with purpose, still walking her land, still listening. He feels something he can't quite name. Not regret, not yet. Something closer to awe, and a little bit of fear. He had been so certain, and his certainty had been so wrong. The quiet witness, watching from a distance as the world he built begins to crack, while the world she nurtured begins to thrive. The water remembers. Then came the summer of 2023, the great drought. It wasn't just a dry spell. It was a fundamental shift. The heat came in May and never left. The sky was a pale, merciless blue for 120 straight days. Rivers shrank to trickles. Reservoirs became mudflats. The Cimarron Valley baked. The AgriCorp operation was a catastrophe. Their shallow-rooted grasses withered and died. The land turned to dust. Their wells began to pump sand. They started trucking in water, hundreds of tanker trucks a day, an endless, roaring parade of failure. The cost was astronomical. The cattle were stressed, getting sick, losing weight. The corporation was hemorrhaging money, millions of dollars a week. But Ilara's ranch was different. Her pastures were still green, not as lush as usual, but green, alive. Her deep-rooted grasses were tapping into the moisture stored deep in the soil she had spent 35 years building. Her creek was low, but it was still running, clear and cool. Her cattle were calm, healthy, gathered in the shade of the cottonwoods she had planted along the creek banks. Her ranch was not just surviving the drought, it was demonstrating its irrelevance. One afternoon in August, a car came down her drive, a clean Ford sedan, just like the one from 35 years ago. David Sterling got out. He was an old man now, his shoulders stooped, his kind eyes were clouded with worry. Ilara met him on the porch. She didn't invite him in. They stood there in the shimmering heat. For a long time, he didn't speak. He just looked at her land, at the green grass, at the impossible, life-giving green. Finally, he spoke. His voice was hoarse. "We need water, Ilara. We're losing our herd. We want to buy water from your creek. We will pay any price. Name your price." It was the ultimate reversal. The titan of industry coming to beg from the foolish girl he had tried to save. Ilara was silent. She looked at this man, this decent man who had been so certain. She felt no triumph, no desire for revenge, only a deep, quiet sorrow for the cost of his certainty. The cost to the land, the cost to the water, the cost to the community. David saw the look in her eyes. He misunderstood it. He thought it was anger. He said, "I know what you're thinking. You were right, and I was wrong. We were all wrong. We were arrogant. We were greedy. We should have listened." Ilara shook her head slowly, and then she delivered the quiet devastation, the line that would become the legend of the valley. "You weren't wrong, David. You were certain. That's worse. Wrong can be corrected. Wrong can learn. Certainty is a closed door. You didn't come here to listen 35 years ago. You came here to inform me of a future that was already decided. My water is not for sale. My land is not for sale. What I have here cannot be bought. It can only be earned." Sterling just stood there, broken, defeated, not by a business rival, but by a different way of seeing the world, a world he had been too certain to ever understand. He got back in his car, and he drove away through the dust. But that's not the end of the story, because what happened next changed everything. She didn't let AgriCorp's cattle die. 2 days later, she sent a proposal to their board of directors. It wasn't an offer to sell water. It was a plan for the valley's survival. She proposed the creation of the Cimarron Valley Water Trust, an independent entity to manage the entire watershed. AgriCorp would have to fund it, as restitution for the damage they had caused. They would have to give the trust permanent conservation easements on all their land. They would have to reduce their herd size by 75%, and they would have to adopt her methods of regenerative grazing. The trust would be managed by a board made up of ranchers, scientists, and tribal elders. Ilara Vance would be its first chairwoman. It was an unconditional surrender, and a blueprint for a new beginning. The board fought it. Their lawyers screamed, but they had no choice. They were weeks from bankruptcy. They signed the agreement. The work of healing the entire valley began. It will take decades, generations. But the circle is being mended. The water is beginning to remember. Ilara also established the Vance Valley Cooperative, a non-profit that helps young ranchers get started. It provides low-interest loans, access to land, and, most importantly, education in the principles her grandfather wrote down in his journal. Today, there are a dozen new families ranching in the valley. They are not getting rich. They are building lives of purpose. They are healers of the land. On the wall of the cooperative's main office, there is a glass case. Inside is a worn, leather-bound book, her grandfather's journal. It's open to a specific page, the one dated March 12, 1964, the day she was born. Sometimes, Elara's granddaughter, a little girl of 10, will come and stand before the case. She will trace his strong, cursive handwriting with her finger. The generational echo, the knowledge passed down, not in dollars, but in wisdom. The legacy is not the money she made. It is the life she made possible for others. The future she reclaimed from the jaws of certainty. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is sitting at a kitchen table. Across from them is a person with kind eyes, a person who is well-meaning, a person who is respected. And that person is explaining, with perfect logic and genuine concern, why their dream is impossible, why their idea is foolish, why the future is already decided. They are building a cage of kindness, a prison of certainty. This story is for the person who has to stand up from that table and walk away. Not with anger, but with a quiet, profound faith in a different kind of logic. The logic of the soil, the wisdom of the water, the stubborn, unshakable belief that you can mend a broken circle. Proving someone wrong is easy. Proving someone wrong who thinks they are protecting you, that is the loneliest, hardest, and most important work there is. It takes decades. It takes scars. It takes a faith that you can't always explain. But the world is not changed by the certain. It is changed by the quiet, stubborn listeners, the ones who hear a wisdom older than the markets. If this story reminded you of someone who stood against the tide, share it with them. Let them know they are not alone. And if you believe these stories of quiet perseverance need to be told, subscribe to this channel, because there are 1,000 other valleys and 1,000 other guardians, and their stories deserve to be heard. Thank you for listening.